welcome. This is a further conversation around, how to use an impact gaps canvas to inform an ecosystem approach and what it means to come in to an ecosystem with your work and how to do so in a way that is mindful of impact and many of the factors at play. This is just a bit about myself. We're going to whiz right past this slide because it was in the event description. Many of us are familiar with a very traditional business model canvas. And what we have found here at the Center for Social Innovation is that business solely through an economic lens is not actually what social innovation within the context of enterprise is about. This canvas leaves the social and the environmental impact considerations relatively off the page, both positive and negative contexts. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is so that I can also mention a flourishing business canvas, which is a tool that we do tend to partner with that impact gaps canvas, because it does talk through a try impact focus. What ecosystem are you operating within? Who's my work serving? What role is my work playing? All of those wonderful pieces to really start contextualizing and understanding the multiple values that you are generating and creating and serving with your enterprise. So why am I mentioning all of this? Well, there's so many canvases and tools, and here we are adding yet another one to the repertoire of things that we are all juggling at this point in time. So oftentimes when I get people coming into Social Entrepreneurship 101, we first hop into some of these canvases and we start with the impact gaps canvas. And the question that I bump into is, why should I use a canvas? And am I doing it right? And those are big questions that we sort of flag at the outset and ask if we can have a bit of a mindset shift around how might I use a canvas? Am I already using other types of canvases, models, those types of tools in my life already? And if so, like, are they useful? How might a canvas be useful? And so when we think about useful modeling, mapping tools, when we're thinking about why a canvas, it's important sometimes to think, what are some of the intangibles in our life that we are mapping for? And one of my favorites to think about is our calendars. I have so much of my life segmented out and marked in a Google Calendar. It's how I map out and organize time with others I'm collaborating with. It's how I model what my day looks like, what my future time will look like, as well as I'm able to backcast and understand where did my time go. And it's a similar type approach when we get into the use of canvases. And so when we're getting to our journey towards impact, we're really ebbing and flowing between, what is that initial ideation? How am I using that ideation to really gear into my problem solution market fit? What is an initial implementation, an ongoing consideration, and then what is impact at scale look like? Who is being affected? What is that impact? And so as we're muddling around in this truly non-linear journey, it's so important to ask ourselves some of these questions around, well, what is needed and what is feasible and what is viable? And so as we're getting into these stages around, some of these questions we're asking and getting familiar with the wider context, it really is crucial to start really mapping out our knowledge in a way that is gearing it towards impact, as well as helping to inform our teammates, our colleagues, our community that we're working within, as well as having that space for that community to come in and have some of those conversations further with us as well. So I love to show this consideration around, that innovation sweet spot being in the crossover between, desirability, viability, a feasibility, as well as impact. And so when we're able to line up those contexts, we can then start uncovering that spot around what does innovation mean at this time in this space for these communities with whatever economic relationship and context we're currently dealing with. I mean, if we look back at this year, this has certainly been a different year than the ones we've experienced before that, and likely the ones that we will be experiencing to come. So as a quick case study for consideration, I'll offer this example around the Trillion Trees campaign. And the Trillion Trees campaign aims to plant 1 trillion trees worldwide, seeks to repopulate the world's trees and combat climate change as a nature-based solution. So, really, who could disagree with more trees in the world. And what is important to also think back to is, what are some of the blind spots here? Well, beside the fact that planting trees is not, the panacea for climate change. There's monoplanting considerations, invasive tree species, threatening ecosystems, such as ancient grasslands, the albedo effect that comes into play. What is community ownership and indigenous rights? Are we creating solutions that are in community and are generating community wealth? And then also, what are these drives for automation and their effects for the livelihoods of those within those environmental contexts there? So just some considerations around what it means to take that wider lens approach in your ecosystem. And we're going to be getting into that in just a second. So when we're talking about why an impact gaps canvas, well, this is an offering, or an invitation rather, to see if this mapping tool may be useful for you in understanding and tracking your ecosystem that you're working within, and what impact could look like and will continue to look like as you move forward within it. Many of us are so active within our ecosystems that we sort of slam into them, start getting to know them, reacting, and then not necessarily tracking the work that we've done, nor the impact that it has had. And so the whole mindset approach behind having an impact gaps canvas is that we can do some of that foundational discovery work at the outset of our ideation phase, get to know our ecosystem more and more, and then as we continue to discover and evolve within it, test, pilot, iterate, talk to more actors within it, we are then able to also track the work that we're doing and to understand how that impact is unfolding and where might we go, how might we continue to be strategic with that. So using that impact gaps canvas, there are many ways to get in there. Discovering your ecosystem, tracking its evolution, uncovering impact opportunity, as well as how is it that we might challenge our limiting beliefs and our assumptions within our ecosystem. Can we oftentimes do an impact gaps canvas of another ecosystem to learn from it? Absolutely. So I introduced to you the impact gaps canvas, and I would encourage you please to think of this as a larger mapping tool. I know for many of the people I work with, this single printout is way too small for their needs, and so I know people have developed a doc for each category and subcategory, or they use this framework essentially as a frame to put on a wall to really start physically getting into some of these spaces. So I really would encourage you to, when you see this tool, see it as a framework suggestion, and also acknowledge, are there things missing from this that you'd like to incorporate? Is there a parking lot or a bike rack that you can park some ideas or questions that you have that we're cultivating. So when we get into an impact gaps canvas, we like to first hop in at the top. You throw in your enterprise name. What is that challenge that you're addressing, and what's that focus, that scope? Is it geographic? Is it a type of work or an industry? What is that demographic consideration that you're placing into this canvas for your context? So I like to say, when we are getting into our ecosystem, it's almost as if we're looking to design our enterprises in ways that are really useful and impactful and meaningful to the systems they're coming into. And so how can we know what is useful if we don't first take the time to get to know that ecosystem? So I like to say it's as if you've walked into a dark room and you are desperately wanting to create a piece of work that is useful, that generates a thriving wage, that develops and really invests into community wealth, and that is gainful for the environment. And so how do we know what that mechanism will look like until we turn on that light in that room and we start taking stock of what's in it, as well as talking to the components and researching what's out and who's sharing that space with us? So I like to say, imagine yourself in a dark room. You've turned on the light's on. Now you see there is a couch There is a chair. There's a person sitting on that chair that was in the room with you the whole time. There's a cat, and you don't know what that relationship is going to be with that cat. And then as you're standing there trying to take this all in, a Roomba rounds the corner, getting ready to like swipe out your feet. So you then have to like hop over it. So all of these components are in this ecosystem with you. So how might you use this canvas to start asking these questions to learn about what are some of the core components in this ecosystem? What are their relationships? How are they working together? Are there challenges, solutions, areas for impact? What's coming up? So when we first get into this canvas, we do so through the verticals. So the first vertical we get into is that challenge landscape. We talk about the challenge, what those obstacles are, history and the future of it, asking about those patterns, as well as that learning log at the bottom. How do you know the things that you know? What sources have you used? Research have you done? Who have you spoken with? It's almost like where you're logging your information, if you will. So the reason why we take this first vertical approach is this way you can start testing the scope of your canvas. Do I need to focus in? Do I need to take a step back? And as you're really developing that scope, you're then also developing your consideration around what are good sources of information? Where do I need to go to understand this challenge? Who do I need to speak with further? And also, you're taking stock of your lived experience. Many people who are coming into these challenge landscapes are doing so because they have a very unique and incredibly valuable lived experience around what that challenge is. And so here in this particular vertical, there's also the opportunity to talk through what is the history of that challenge? Why is it a challenge? And where is it going to continue evolving if left unchecked? So when we get into this challenge portion, vertical, it really is a sort of a mindset shift around research, analysis, as well as talking to those who are in that landscape and understanding what is the pattern of that challenge. So once we get in there, and this is just a visual so we can all see, as you're getting into this canvas, you're putting your stickies in there, you're writing your notes, whatever sort of tool mapping that works for you to capture that information is actually, I find, where this tool tends to fall down. Many people see this tool and it's very flat. And where it wins is when people take it out of this very flat space and start busting it out for their needs. It's on a wall, it's in a series of docs. Some people who are more visual like to just take snapshots of their canvas as they're working onto it. So really, it comes alive when you start working into it. So that next vertical we get into is that solution side. We start mapping out those solutions and saying, okay, we have identified these challenges. We've talked to people, we've done research, we know the scope, we know where they are. We also are starting to ask questions about what we don't know. And we're acknowledging that there is a to be known area. So when we're hopping over into that solutions landscape, we're then asking, who's in this space with me? Are there other organizations that are working on solutions? Not perfect, but still values aligned, potential collaborators, partners, who's in there looking to make a change with you? And then what are some models, some approaches to those solutions that are going on? What are some of those future impact scope scenarios, so on and so forth? And then again, to that solutions learning log at the bottom, what resources have you learned? Have you used to understand the current solution? And how can I keep hopping into this as well? So I want to acknowledge I'm really jumping through these verticals, and that's to give you the overview of how we get into this, and I'm going to bust it out into pieces in just a moment. So first we're going to take this high level view around the approach, and then we're going to get into the granularity. So again, hopping into that, putting on whatever format you need to unpack its value. So I see we've got Trello boards, we've got Miro. I hope there's a web jam in there, or as well as a mural. I am 100% a like masking tape, post-it, rough scrap paper on a wall type of person with lots of pictures. So it's important to do what works for you. And then when we get into that middle section, that's when we start talking about some of those gaps. Now, the reason why it's important to acknowledge the gaps isn't so that we can go in and address all of them. It's actually more important to acknowledge them and then to sit and to consider, well, how might how might you best utilize your skills, resources, financial resources, and time components to begin serving impact? You know, where are you the most able to give and to start generating that impact? As well as now that you've started talking around what are those areas for impact, you are mindful of potential partners, collaborators, um, and how you might be able to grow your work within this ecosystem. So by identifying all of these gaps, you're not looking to fill all of them. You are instead looking to understand how might you best affect that impact with your particular set of skills and resources in that moment in time. And so again, for that visual, slamming in your Post-its. And I will say what's also been neat about this tool and seeing it come alive is when it is worked with in combination. So with teams, when I've built out an impact gaps canvas for many entrepreneur or client and said, this is what I've researched your ecosystem to be, and now I'd like to interview you to get your understanding as well. And that power of perspective, that insight that is offered, you know, the languaging, the translation of experience really does come alive when we start using this tool as a form of communication and sharing. So not only is this a great tool for our mapping and use, but it's really quite meaningful when it comes time to translating that work and that understanding. Has anyone else lived in an ecosystem experiencing these three considerations so deeply and personally that when someone asks you to unpack it, you're sort of like, where do I start? You know, what level am I going to take you in on? Um, Ever onboard a colleague or need to communicate to an investor or someone in your community the ecosystem that you're coming into and having a hard time translating all that information? This is a great way to do that. It's a great visual tool to not only share your understanding, but to also invite that conversation and that understanding of those sharing this space with you, building those connections and really deepening those relationships with all of those actors in your ecosystem. And then once we work through those verticals, we start shifting across the page. So some of the reason why those verticals are so separated is they're really quite different mindsets. It's quite a different approach. And when we take that time to really deepen in and research each of those areas, we can then start working across the page and thinking a bit more connectively. This is the challenge that exists. And I have now researched that this is an existing solution or set of solutions that are working to achieve change specifically for this component of the challenge, maybe in this geographic region, maybe for this aspect of the work, or this demographic bracket, so on and so forth. Great. Is there a gap there? You know, that challenge exists and that solution is working within it. What is that gap that still persists or is opening up, that area for opportunity and impact? And so that's how we start connecting across the page. So when we do share the work that we're doing, when someone says, what is it that you do and how do you know the things you know? You can say, we've identified this challenge. These are some of the existing solutions and approaches. And there is this gap, this still persistent gap. And here's where we're coming into it and why. And so it really gives you a framework for understanding the logic and the approach for your work, be it a social enterprise, be it an initiative or a project. You are really explaining the theory and the ecosystem approach of the work that you're doing. So I'm going to get into it a little farther and we're going to go through each of the sections and I'm going to talk us through some of the mindset considerations that come up. And I do want to acknowledge that questions come up. Now, if we were to do this in a more traditional space with a bit more time, say like an SE 101, we would take a week for each of these verticals. And And that time in between a session would be devoted to research. So it is a big tool, and we are really compacting it here. So what I'd like to ask is that as I'm going through these sections, please take notes for what's coming up for you in the work that you're doing, as in if there are questions that are coming up, either journal them for you and for your personal reflection, or if you'd like to hop them into that chat, I have it open, and so I'll be able to speak to some of them as we're getting into it. It's also a great way to sort of share what's coming up for people as they're reflecting on these questions, and if there's another layer to questions that's also coming up. And again, to acknowledge, we have some SE 101 alumni in the room. And so we've just experienced a huge ecosystem shift. The landscape has changed dramatically. And so as we revisit these questions in these new and evolving contexts, I'd love to know what's coming up. Because oftentimes when we ask ourselves these questions, we have more questions than we have answers. And that's beautiful, because those are questions that come with you into interviews. They're questions that you take into your work and your research. So if you're open to it, would love to have that sharing space here in our chat so that we can sort of have that combined learning together. But I'm going to be going through it pretty quick. So here we go. I'm first going to be helping us into that challenge landscape. And again, when we talk about that challenge landscape and focus, we hop into identifying that challenge and the parameters around it. We talk about those obstacles, as specific as we can be. We also talk about, what is that history and future, that pattern, and how do we know the things that we know. So first things first, how do we identify a challenge? And that's a pretty big ask and question. So how would you, as a founder, or as someone looking to come into this community and work, how would you describe that challenge? And for those who've hopped into this tool already, who have you invited into this conversation? How do other people within the community define and describe this challenge? Did words come up, parameters, considerations, blockers? Who or what is affected? If you ask, from my perspective, that's going to give you one view. From another perspective, there may be a different set of values reflected in who or what is affected. And then how is it related to other issues also depends on what other issues are we aware of. I know even in this group, as I share this space with my CSI colleagues, we each have our personal values and interests that heavily inform how we're relating these challenges to the other issues that we're deeply invested in. So think about this for yourself, but also take that time to share it out with those you're sharing space with to understand how might others who are coming into this space with you also describe this challenge. And so Sharon, I do see your question about reports from surveys of people who've done this work. I'm a little unclear on it. So if you could just maybe give me a bit more explanation around that, I'm going to hop into it as I can, but I'm going to keep pushing us into the next pieces. What has been neat is we are able to now put these canvases into a large mural board and have our participants hop into them. And we're able to start mapping together, hopping into other people's maps as well. And people have also used those tools, those online tools, as a way to sort of bridge this digital gap and say, I'd like to send you a canvas. Would you be open to going through some of it with me? So to that point, obstacles to change. We've just identified, when we're talking about collaborating and what, this digital context has done to our collaboration, we can acknowledge, a digital communication realm can be limiting. It's not our first choice when it comes to modes of communication and collaboration. Great. So when you're thinking about your challenge, specifically identify those obstacles. What's causing that challenge? What is keeping it from changing? Is there a continual issue that's coming up that's keeping it from evolving and growing? And furthermore, who or what benefits from that current status quo? So who is in that system with you? Who would maybe disagree with you? This isn't a challenge. This is a benefit. This is an opportunity. And what is that perspective? Because that is also an obstacle. No judgment whatsoever, just a realistic, like physical obstacle component. So um, that's a piece to keep in mind. So yes, Sharon, thanks for that reclarification. Measurements to use to describe what success looks like through using this process. And so success for this tool looks different for everyone. And I think we've actually got a few experiences in the space with us around how are people taking this tool and what is making it useful. And so I'd say what is useful about this tool is worth revisiting. Is it helping you get into spaces with teams, to communicate with communities you're coming into? Because those markers of success really are around how are you widening your knowledge and how is that unlocking value and impact for you quicker into that space. So when we're getting into that challenge, it's also important to ask, what is that history and that future? So is there a pattern? How has that problem or opportunity changed over time? Most of the time as entrepreneurs and people who are, looking to create impact, you come into a space because you yourself now have reached a particular point in time and learnings where you now feel like you can start approaching what are solutions and ideas around impact. And so taking time to understand, how has that challenge evolved? What does my experience look like within this ecosystem is really quite meaningful when we're mapping out, what is this problem? How has it shifted over time? Where might it go? Why now? Why are we here right now? And what is that tipping point telling us about that change that needs to happen? And again, just to briefly mention, when you're in that bottom part of this canvas, you're asking, what resources have you used? Who have you spoken with? As well as, who else do you need to speak with? How many times have we had conversations with people and said, I still have these unanswered questions, or we've had someone in that space with us say, I really have got to connect you to these 3 other people. Great. This is that space where you map it out and you're able to track, how is this helping you capture your knowledge, but where is this moving you forward to? So many of us think of impact, but we're not necessarily sure how to get there. This is a part of that roadmap. What do we know? How do we know it? And where is it showing us that we need to go next? Who do I need to talk to next? So that is the challenge landscape. And now we're going to take a bit of time. I'm going to shift us into the solutions landscape, when we're talking about what are solutions, what is a model, and what does that mean? And then what is it, the importance around future impact and solutions and learnings there. So when we're over in that solution side, we've first identified that challenge, and we've talked around all of the problems and components that are coming up. Now we're hopping over into that solution side, and some of the questions we're asking is, who is in this space with us? How are they addressing these challenges? What are their models? We'll get into that in a second. So in a solutions landscape, what are some solutions that are already being tried? This is our opportunity to really map out, who is in this space with us. Are they collaborators? Are they people that I can, share an office space with when that time comes, or who I can, create an event with, who would be a good partner or a collaborator, or perhaps an organization that my work can serve farther. And you're really looking to create the beginnings of a map. What are those current solutions, those efforts? As well as keeping your eyes open. We've just witnessed a huge shift, and so there is a big evolution in what are solution efforts, where are they coming from, and what do they look like. And so some models around that. What are the approaches that are being tried? What parts of the problems do each of these models address? Future impact and scenarios. What are some of those opportunities? How are you positioning your work today for impact tomorrow and in the future? What are some considerations and questions that are coming up? And again, that solutions and learning log there. So I am going to, because I see we are officially out of time, I'm going to take us to that last piece where we start going across the page. And so, when we're getting into that solutions landscape, those are the questions we're asking. And we're hopping into that gap section in that middle area to say, okay, Now we've acknowledged challenges, solutions. Who's not being served? Where is that gap? Are there unaddressed obstacles? Are there still challenges that we're still not able to address? Maybe there are unintended negative consequences that are only coming up because we've gotten that far in our work. Are there impact opportunities, specific and key areas where we can start our work and our future impact? And the biggest takeaway, key insights. You've thought of these challenges, you've thought of these solutions, you've identified gaps. What would you share with someone coming into your space as key insights to really help guide and inform their work? So those are those pieces there. And taking it into your practice with you and connecting it across the page really is the important part of this GAPS canvas. And I will leave you with my contact information, and our next SE 101 is running June and July of 2021. As Tara pointed out in that link, the canvas can be downloaded there, and pleasure to share this tool with you. It is a big one, so looking forward to unpacking this with each of you as those questions come up.